Hello there, and welcome to Dream Myths. Tonight, as requested by many of you, we travel back in time to the magical world of ancient Greece, where we'll discover tales of gods and heroes beyond the azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, where the ancient call of sailors echoes over crumbling pillars. The hills of Greece undulate with olive trees and wild thyme. An eerie silence settles over the land, a premonition of the ancient powers stirring beneath the earth and in the heavens. In a remote mountain village, a fire sparks to life in the agora, and around its warming glow, timeless tales awaken. As the violet dusk creeps over the countryside, the realm of myths awakens. Specters drift between the branches of ash trees, barely glimpsed in distant caves. These are the lost souls, their final journey to the underworld delayed by the cruel whims of the divine, who whisper of forgotten prophecies and long-past betrayals. Immortal nymphs, guardians of springs and groves, prepare their nightly dances, their ethereal forms little sensed by mortal perceptions. And high atop Mount Olympus, a place shrouded in eternal clouds, the gods and goddesses ready their own affairs, a divine drama of love, jealousy, and war, utterly beyond human comprehension. This is not a mere story, but an echo of the first days of creation. The very fabric of the cosmos is woven with the divine conflicts that birth the world as we know it. From the primordial chaos, the first deities emerged, formless and immense, but from them a new, more terrible generation was born, the Titans. These were the elder gods, beings of immense power and raw elemental force, and their reign was a time of brutal, unyielding strength. Their leader, the ruthless Cronus, overthrew his own father, the sky god Uranus. But a chilling prophecy foretold that he too would be undone by one of his own children. In a desperate act to defy fate, Cronus devoured his children as they were born, a monstrous act of cannibalism that sealed their fates within his immortal belly. He swallowed Poseidon, god of the seas, Hades, master of the underworld, and Hestia, goddess of the hearth, along with their siblings. But his wife, Rhea, a deity of compassion and cunning, could not bear this horror. she secreted away their sixth child, Zeus, to a remote cave on Mount Ida, replacing him with a swaddled rock which Cronus, in his arrogance, swallowed without a second thought. And so the seed of rebellion was sown in the very place where the old gods ruled. Zeus grew to adulthood in hiding, a silent, powerful force gathering strength for his inevitable confrontation. When the time was right, he returned, a god of lightning and thunder, and a terrible purpose in his eyes. He tricked his father with a potent elixir, causing the Titan to vomit forth his siblings, who emerged fully grown and ready for war. With his liberated brothers and sisters at his side, Zeus led the Olympians in a war against the Titans, a conflict so immense it shook the very foundations of the universe. It was a clash of two generations of gods, a brutal 10-year war known as the Titanomachy. Zeus, with his mighty thunderbolts, led the charge. The battle raged across the heavens and the earth, and at its end, the Titans were vanquished, cast down into the darkest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. Their imprisonment was a final, damning act of divine supremacy. Yet, even with the Titans defeated, the earth was far from peaceful. Monstrous beings and giants rose to challenge the new order, but Zeus's lightning bolts, forged in the heart of a storm, always prevailed, and with his reign secured, Greece entered a time of relative stability and peace under the dominion of the gods of Mount Olympus. It was an age of divine oversight, a tenuous calm before the next great storm would break. After the first primordial deities, the formless beings of creation, a new and more terrible generation was born. The 12 mighty Titans. These were the elder gods, beings of immense power and raw, unyielding strength, and their reign was a time of brutal, unforgiving force. Among them was Cronus, a figure of dark ambition, who overthrew his own father, the sky god Uranus, and seized power for himself. But a chilling prophecy, whispered on the wind and etched into the fabric of fate, foretold that he, in turn, would be undone by one of his own children. In a desperate, monstrous act to defy destiny, Cronus began to swallow each of his offspring as they were born. Their silent screams were a tear in the fabric of fate, a silent cry for vengeance that would one day be answered. Poseidon, the future lord of the seas, Hades, the formidable master of the underworld, and Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Each was consumed, a silent testament to their father's fear. But his wife, Rhea, a deity of compassion and cunning, could not bear this horror. When their sixth child, Zeus, was born, she secreted him away to a remote cave, replacing him with a swaddled rock, which Cronus, in his arrogance, swallowed without a second thought. And so, the seed of rebellion was sown in the very heart of the old god's dominion. Zeus grew to adulthood in hiding, a silent, powerful force gathering strength for his inevitable confrontation. When the time was right, he returned, a god of lightning and thunder, a terrible purpose in his eyes. He tricked his father with a potent elixir, causing the Titan to vomit forth his siblings, who emerged fully grown and ready for war. With his liberated brothers and sisters at his side, Zeus led the Olympians in a war against the Titans, a conflict so immense it shook the very foundations of the universe. This was the Titanomachy, a brutal 10-year war that pitted two generations of gods against each other. To aid their cause, Zeus freed the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires giants from Tartarus, and they, grateful for their liberation, joined the Olympian cause. At its end, the Titans were vanquished, cast down into the darkest pit of the underworld, Tartarus, their fall echoing across the universe as a bitter lesson in the inevitable cycle of power and betrayal. But even with the Titans defeated, the earth was far from peaceful. Monstrous beings and giants rose to challenge the new order. But Zeus's powerful lightning bolts, forged in the heart of the storm, always prevailed, and with his reign now secure, Greece entered a time of relative stability and peace under the dominion of the gods of Mount Olympus. As chief of the Olympians, Zeus took Hera as his wife, though his legendary infidelities were the stuff of myths themselves, as he continued to have children with many other goddesses. And so, the gods and goddesses lived an existence of divine luxury and indulgence in their ornate palaces on Mount Olympus. From their gilded halls, they oversaw the affairs of mortal men on earth below, a privileged and all-powerful pantheon. But even in their palaces of gold and marble, the very human emotions of jealousy, vanity, and pride simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for a catalyst to ignite them. And that catalyst came in the form of a golden apple inscribed with the words, "For the fairest." The story begins in the ancient city of Troy, a place of immense wealth and power, founded on a low hill near the entrance to the Hellespont by Elos, a descendant of Zeus. Ilis, seeking divine favor, prayed to the gods for good luck. The following morning, he discovered a large wooden statue, the Palladium, an image that the goddess Athena had made in memory of her friend Pallas. Apollo himself appeared to Elus, begging him to keep the statue sacred, for as long as Troy preserved this token of godly esteem, the city would be safe from all invaders. For years, the good name of Troy had been tarnished by the grudges of gods who had been wronged by its leaders. This secret, festering hatred from Olympus, now masked by a fragile peace, lay in wait for the city's undoing. But under the shrewd and swift-footed King Priam, Troy was allowed to blossom once more. Yet, destiny could not be so easily cheated. When Priam's wise wife, Hecuba, dreamed that she had borne a firebrand, their youngest son, Paris, was cast away, left to die on the heights of Mount Ida. But fate, in its cruel irony, had other plans. Paris did not perish. He was suckled by a bear and raised by herdsmen in the mountains, where he grew into a handsome and strong young man, ignorant of his noble birth, content to live with the exquisite mountain nymph, Oenone. He seemed destined for a simple, peaceful life. Then, one day, he was visited by Hermes, the messenger of the gods. An altercation had broken out on Olympus, and 3 of the loveliest goddesses required a judge to ascertain which was the fairest. It had been decreed by Zeus that Paris, a man of great wisdom and fair looks, despite his rustic upbringing, was the chosen one. The goddesses descended upon the unsuspecting Paris. Hera, the majestic queen of Olympus. Athena, the fierce goddess of wisdom and battle. And Aphrodite, the irresistible goddess of love. The contest was the work of Eris, the goddess of discord, who, having been excluded from a wedding feast, had maliciously thrown a golden apple inscribed with "For the fairest" at the feet of the 3 deities. Hera offered Paris all her queenly gifts, wealth, power, and the richest lands on earth. Athena offered him wisdom and unparalleled success in battle. But Aphrodite, the most cunning of the three, offered him a prize that appealed to the heart's deepest desires, the most beautiful woman on earth to be his wife. Though Paris was already wed to Oenone, he chose Aphrodite without a moment's hesitation and gave the golden apple to the goddess of love, a simple, fatal choice that, in its ripple effect, would ignite the flames of a war that would consume all of mankind. With the glow of divine gratification still upon him, Paris set off to take part in the games arranged by his birth father, King Priam. It was his first visit to the city since his infancy, and to the astonishment of all, he excelled at the games, his strength and skill surpassing even that of his brothers. It was in this moment of triumph that his sister, Cassandra, a princess cursed with the gift of divination and the torment of never being believed, recognized him. "Do not raise your hand against your brother," she cried out, her voice filled with a desperate, prophetic terror. But her words, as always, were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. Reunited with his family and welcomed as a prince, Paris was given a great duty to travel to Greece to secure the return of his Aunt Hesione. Cassandra's prophetic visions showed her death and destruction, a great war that would consume Troy. Her pleas were ignored, her warnings silenced by the joyous ignorance of her family. And so, Paris set off on his voyage, a journey that would change the course of history. He stopped to visit King Menelaus of Sparta, a man of great power and influence, married to Helen, a woman whose beauty was the stuff of legends. This diversion, a seemingly innocent visit of diplomacy, led Helen far from her marriage vows and into the arms of another man. Their elopement would ignite a fire that would engulf the world of Greece and begin a battle that would rage for 10 long, bloodthirsty years. Helen was no ordinary woman. She was the daughter of Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, and her beauty was so extraordinary that it drew suitors from every corner of the Greek world. Men of impeccable records and inordinate riches vied for her hand. The wise and cunning Odysseus, fearing the bloodshed that would inevitably follow her choice, suggested a solution. All the suitors who were not chosen must swear an oath to defend to the death the one who won her hand. And so it was that Menelaus, the wealthiest of the princes, became king of Sparta and married to the exquisite Helen with 1,000 sworn warriors bound to his cause. But one day, the fates chose to send the ship of Paris to Sparta. From the moment he set eyes on Helen, he decided he must have her, and he called upon Aphrodite to fulfill her promise. When the honest and unsuspecting Menelaus set out on an expedition, he entrusted Paris with the care of his wife. But before he could return, Paris had eloped with Helen, taking her away from her marriage and her daughter, Hermione, along with the treasures he had plundered from the palace. As their ship sailed toward Troy, a sudden, unnatural calm settled upon the sea. From the depths, the sea god Poseidon rose, his form immense and powerful, and in a voice that rumbled like thunder, he delivered a chilling prophecy. The Greeks will come across this sea, vowed to redress the wrong done by thee, and to overthrow the towers of King Priam. The elopement of Paris and Helen sent a wave of shock through the Greek lands, a storm of rage and betrayal. Menelaus, distraught and humiliated, immediately gathered the men who had pledged their sacred oath. All but 2 answered the call: the cunning Odysseus and the mighty Achilles. Odysseus, now a husband and father, had been warned by an oracle that if he went to Troy, he would be separated from his home for 20 years. In a desperate act to avoid the war, he feigned madness, plowing his fields with salt. But Palamedes, a rival of Odysseus, laid the infant Telemachus in the path of the plow, forcing Odysseus to reveal his sanity and agree to join the campaign. Achilles, the greatest warrior in all of Greece, was also summoned, but his mother, Thetis, a sea nymph who knew of a prophecy that the war would lead to his certain death, had disguised him in the garb of a maiden and hidden him among the daughters of the king of Skyros. But the crafty Odysseus, a man who saw through all deceptions, found him. Disguised as a peddler, he offered the maidens fine goods, but when he revealed a dagger and a shield, Achilles immediately grabbed them, betraying his identity and his warrior's heart. With the reluctant heroes now in tow, the impressive collection of 1,000 ships gathered at Aulis. But as they prepared to set forth for Troy, their sails were met by a deathly calm that disallowed even a breath of wind. It so transpired that Artemis, The goddess of the hunt was behind the stillness. Agamemnon, the Greek commander, had unwittingly hurt her pride by slaying one of her sacred hinds. She demanded a terrible price for the winds, the sacrifice of Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon, torn between his duty and his love, was urged on by Menelaus. Iphigenia, with a courage that belied her age, proclaimed her willingness to die for her people. But just as the seer Calchas was about to strike, she vanished, taken by Artemis herself, who, in a moment of divine pity, left a snow-white fawn in her place. The goddess was appeased, and a mighty gale began to blow, carrying the ships toward Troy. This was no longer a simple war of men. It was a chess game of the gods, with mortals as the pawns. The war began badly for the Greeks. The hero Protesilaus leapt onto the beaches of Troy and was instantly slain by Troy's champion, Hector, a grim foreshadowing of the bloodshed to come. The excellent marksman Philoctetes was bitten by a snake, and the Greeks, unable to bear the stench of his infection, had to leave the warrior on the rocky island of Lemnos. The stage was set, the sides were drawn, and a war that had been sparked by a moment of human passion was about to become an epic conflict between mortals and gods, a battle for love, honor, and the very fate of Troy. For 9 long, grueling years, the Greeks fought at the impenetrable walls of Troy. This was no ordinary siege. It was a war where the gods themselves became entangled, a conflict born of a single mortal woman. But the 10th year would bring a climax of vengeance and tragedy that would forever change the course of the war. A quarrel occurred that would fracture the very heart of the Greek army. Achilles, the greatest warrior of all time, had taken 2 beautiful young women as prizes from the sack of the city of Lyrnessus, Chrysis and Briseis. But when a plague struck the Greek camp, the seer Calchas declared it to be the wrath of Apollo, angered that Agamemnon had taken his priestess, Chryseis, as a spoil of war. Forced to return her, Agamemnon, in a fit of rage and wounded pride, retaliated by stealthily taking Briseis from the camp of Achilles. Achilles was so enraged, so disgusted by this act of dishonor, that he threw down his armor and swore an oath he would no longer fight for Agamemnon. The greatest warrior in all of Greece, now a silent observer of the unfolding tragedy, became a festering wound in the Greek army's heart. With Achilles withdrawn, the tide of battle turned. The Trojans, emboldened by the absence of their greatest foe, pushed the Greeks back to their ships. In a moment of false hope, Hector, the Trojan champion, proposed a duel between Menelaus and Paris to decide the fate of Helen and end the war. Menelaus, fueled by a grudge that had festered for 10 years, pinned Paris to the city walls. But Aphrodite, the goddess who had promised Paris Helen, descended upon the fighters, hiding her beloved behind a shimmering cloth and pulling him to safety, a cowardly retreat that infuriated the Greeks. The gods, too, had taken sides, with Apollo falling with the Trojan defenders and Zeus with the Greek invaders. The battles raged, and the Trojans began to burn the Greek ships in the harbor. Seeing his friends and countrymen being slaughtered, Patroclus, the great friend of Achilles, appeared in his friend's armor, hoping to frighten the Trojans into retreat. It worked, but his triumph was short-lived. Apollo, knowing this was not Achilles, wounded him, knocking his sword and shield away. In that moment of vulnerability, Hector stepped in and killed Patroclus with a single, fatal blow. The roar of the Greeks, a sound of despair and rage, woke the slumbering Achilles. When word of his dear friend's death reached him, he sprang into action, his cry for revenge striking terror into the hearts of all who heard it. He fought on, a force of pure, destructive vengeance, slaying all who crossed his path in his search for Hector. When Hector saw Achilles, he too stopped dead and tried to run. But Achilles, a god of battle incarnate, was too strong, too fast. 3 times they ran around the walls of the city, a desperate chase between a mortal hero and a man consumed by grief. Achilles caught him and killed him at once, an act of brutal revenge that sealed the fate of Troy. Achilles' vengeance knew no bounds. He killed Penthesilea, the queen of the Amazons, and even the arrogant politician Thersites with a single blow. When Memnon, a powerful Ethiopian warrior, arrived with his troops to aid the Trojans, Achilles called upon Zeus to judge between them. Zeus presented Achilles with a sword, and he slew Memnon, whose followers turned into birds upon his death. The war was no longer about Paris or Helen. It was a testament to the terrible, beautiful force of Achilles' rage. Achilles, now consumed by his quest for vengeance, continued his relentless rampage, becoming more boastful than ever. He seemed invincible, but the gods, in their eternal jealousy of mortal glory, had grown impatient with his arrogance. In a final, cruel twist of fate, Apollo, the god of the sun and music, took control of the hand of Paris. The very man who had ignited the war with his selfish desire, now with divine guidance, fired an arrow that found its mark, the one vulnerable spot on the great warrior's body, his heel. The blow was fatal, and Achilles died instantly, his legendary might brought low by a single poisoned arrow. The Greeks, weakened by the death of their greatest hero, were filled with a cold, desperate resolve. They would not be denied their victory. The seer Calchas reminded them of one final condition for Troy's fall. The Palladium, the large wooden statue of Athena, had to be removed from the city, for it was its divine guardian, protecting its gates from all invaders. This seemingly impossible task fell to Odysseus. With his mind as sharp as any blade, he rescued Philoctetes from his terrible ordeal on the island of Lemnos. With a poisoned arrow from the bow of Heracles, a weapon of legendary power, Philoctetes finally killed Paris, ending the life of the man who had started the war with his fatal choice. Odysseus, a master of disguise and cunning, then ventured into the heart of Troy itself, dressed as a beggar, and with the help of the goddess Athena and his loyal companion Diomedes, he navigated the city's labyrinthine streets and stole the sacred Palladium. With the statue gone, Troy's final, desperate breath was held in the balance, its divine protection stripped away. With the city now vulnerable, Odysseus unveiled his final, brilliant plan: the Trojan horse. He commissioned the craftsman Appius to build an enormous, hollow wooden horse, large enough to hold 50 Greek warriors. The remainder of the Greek fleet made a show of sailing away, leaving the horse on the beach as a supposed offering to Athena. To deceive the Trojans, a man named Sinon was left behind, a master of lies who convinced the Trojans that the horse was a gift and that the Greeks had finally abandoned their siege. In a fit of drunken celebration, the Trojans dragged the horse into their city, their joyous revelry silencing the desperate warnings of Cassandra and the seer Laocoon, who was then strangled by 2 sea serpents as a sign of divine disapproval. The Trojans feasted, celebrating the end of a 10-year war, but Helen alone remained suspicious. She slipped into the temple where the horse was, and in a final, chilling act of cunning, called out in the voices of the wives of the men hidden inside, tempting them to reveal themselves. Only the shrewd Odysseus guessed her trick, holding his hand over the mouth of each hero, keeping them silent and still. When the Trojan men were drunk and sleepy, the men slid from the horse on ropes, and the massacre began. The city was a slaughterhouse, its streets soaked in the blood of generations of warriors. King Priam was murdered as he crossed his courtyard. Menelaus went straight to the chambers of his errant wife, who spoke words of such regret and remorse that he held her in his arms once more, a slave to her love, and all was forgiven. The plundering of Troy continued. Queen Hecuba, stripped of her kingdom and her family, watched the massacre from her tower window. When Odysseus took her as his prize, her howls of despair reached to the heavens, and she was magically transformed into a dog. Troy, the great city once protected by the gods, was broken, its walls shattered and its streets soaked in blood. The Greeks set the city alight, a blazing beacon to all who had known her. The war that had begun with a beautiful face ended with a city's fiery grave, a warning to lovers and to the men of war that would live in their memories for all time. And so it was that Helen returned to Sparta with Menelaus, but the tales of the heroes' return voyages, some glorious, some filled with disaster, became other legends spawned by the War of Troy.